Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Principal at Deloitte Consulting, Courtney Hammond.
Good morning. I'm so honored to be here with you all and with our panelists. So we're going to have a very exciting conversation. And before we start, I wanted to do a brief introduction of the individuals up here. So let's begin. Directly to my left is Tom Derry. He's the CEO of the Institute for Supply Management and has a unique vantage point to observe major macroeconomic travel trends and the development of global supply chain. In his current role, Tom advises Fortune 500 chief procurement officers and chief supply chain officers in the alignment of procurement with overall business performance. Next, we have Michael Gibbs. He's the chief global knowledge and learning officer for ASIS International, a global organization focused on physical security practices, and he works with members on travel safety and security policies, particularly with regard to crisis preparedness and response. Next, we have Lynn Shotwell. She is the executive director of the Council for Global Immigration, the world's leading network dedicated to advancing employment-based immigration. And through this leadership role and others, she has pursued her passion for advocating for policies that promote the global exchange of talent to best serve global business. And last but not least, we have Peggy Smith, the president and CEO of the Worldwide Employee Relocation Council. She brings a keen understanding of global workforce issues, talent and skill shortages, relocation strategy, and other global HR considerations to our panel today. So please help me give them a warm welcome. Thank you. Thank you all for being here. So we only have 30 minutes, so this is going to go fast, and this is going to be a very engaging conversation, as I know all four of these. And we're going to divide the conversation into two big themes, or disruptions impacting global business travel. So let's start with the first, which is the movement of people. And jump right in. This is a big topic that I know for me and for others in the room, the travel restrictions is top of mind. So let me start with Michael and Tom. To what extent do you feel current travel restrictions are impacting business productivity or revenue generation around the world? And what strategies do you feel companies are going to have to employ to protect their business?
Let me start by dividing three types of travel restrictions. First, you have the laptop ban, and to refresh everyone's memory, the laptop ban was imposed by the United States and the United Kingdom on certain airlines, prohibiting the use of or the carrying of a laptop or a tablet in the cabin of several airlines flying direct flights from usually the Middle East, the United States, and UK. That I don't think that will have much impact because the travel ban is already being overruled. It's being got around. Several airlines and the biggies, Turkish Air, Emirates, have already had the ban lifted because they've raised their security levels and their policies and procedures. So, and even in the cases of airlines that still have bans on them and flights that go directly to the United States or the UK, travel security managers can be creative. You know, you can stop off and everything goes through Germany, everything goes through Frankfurt. So you can route flights through there. For the US, you can go through London. And in the cases where you're stuck with one of the banned providers, the executive or the traveler can use their phone. They can do their work elsewhere. So I don't think there'll be much effect on the productivity with the laptop ban. Same thing goes with Trump's so-called ban on Muslim countries. There are 6 or 7 countries that are involved in that. Several of them are war-torn. You have Syria, I think Yemen is one of them. There's not that much business beyond security business and NGO work going on there. What might happen is you're not going to encourage business development there. There's some of that. There's one country that's relatively stable that's affected by the ban, and that's Iran, but there's not too much business development going on there anyway because of the embargo. There's a little bit going on now, but it's not going to, there might be some effect on Iranian business development. So finally, the third area where I think there is an effect on productivity and business development is corporations' own travel policies. And these are informed by a company's own culture, by their risk appetite, by budget, and by US State Department and other government travel advisories and warnings. And we're seeing, my organization just did a survey of global Fortune 1000 companies to see how the terrorist attacks in UK and France, Belgium, elsewhere in the last couple of years have affected travel to those areas. And we heard that 2/3 of them are limiting travel. Now, that's not saying nobody's going, but instead of sending 10 people, they might be sending 8, or they might be requiring more justification, more stringent justification for travel. So we are seeing that. Mostly, it's on the radar of the C-suite now and of the travelers themselves. Security departments have always known that these are risks, but now we have travelers, coming to security and travel departments and saying, hey, we want this support, and we never worried about going to France or the UK before with all this stuff going on. Please help us and advise us. And so there's more acceptance now of GPS tracking. You can be tracked by your phone, and that's particularly good for disaster response, and some other technologies and other methods. I'll leave it off there.
Great. Tom?
Just to be a little succinct, the reality is that business is not going to avoid the necessary movement of people to develop their businesses. They're going to be careful, right? No company wants to be exposed in terms of putting employees in unsafe situations, but we still have to send people to some pretty unsafe places. So they're going to put protections around that. They're going to have kidnap and ransom insurance. That's actually a fact of life if you work in automotive in some of the different areas of the world. They're going to have armored cars transport you. There's going to be security provided on the ground depending on where you are. And there are going to be common sense precautions around which hotels you stay in. Lynn and I had a conversation backstage. Don't stay in the nice boutiques. Stay in the brand names because they have security precautions and protocols in place. And that makes sense. Besides, you've already negotiated a volume discount with that company anyway, so take advantage of it. So, the reality is we can't afford to not be out there in the world and running our businesses and growing our businesses. But you take common sense precautions and you do what you can to make sure people are safe.
Okay. Let me turn it over to Lynn and Peggy. So considering these travel restrictions, other impacts like Brexit, terrorist attacks in Europe and other regions, what are some of the key talent considerations that procurement professionals, travel managers, schedulers, travelers themselves need to be aware of?
So I'll start. I think one of the things we have to recognize is we live in a global economy and there's a global competition for talent. So, as Michael and Tom said, I don't think there will be a retrenchment of the need for business travel. There may be some changes to it, but certainly what we're seeing is that companies are continuing to need to send personnel abroad, whether it's for short-term business trips or even for longer-term stays. And I think what we have to figure out is how do we balance this and how do we communicate with governments to help them understand our needs to have both secure borders and open doors. And what I've seen, the travel ban in the United States is somewhat unique in terms of the scale and the scope of the amount of attention it's received. But governments around the world are retrenching on the national level in terms of being open to receiving foreign workers. We've seen around the world in elections, in Brexit, in France, in the Netherlands, in Finland, immigration is an issue. And the things underlying that are really threefold. There's a concern about jobs. What are the opportunities for local workers? And so governments are trying to balance that. Security is certainly a concern. And then they're also dealing with integration issues. So where you've seen areas where you've had large movements of refugees into a country, they're concerned about integration. So business travel gets mixed up in all of these other issues. And so we have to really work with governments to help them understand how do you facilitate fair and flexible policies that allow the movement of people and goods that you need for commerce. So governments are doing that on a national level, and then on an international level, we're also having conversations with them 2 weeks ago, I was in Berlin at a meeting of 160 different governments that get together, and they're sharing best practices for kind of how do you manage flows of migrants. And if you look at it on an international level, there are a lot of bad things that are going on out there. There's human trafficking. There, in some cases, human slavery. So the governments are trying to figure out how do you manage borders in this situation. And they're in the process right now of negotiating a global compact on migration that they aim to have done in September 2018. So what business has done is we've presented them with a set of principles for how do you effectively manage, fair, flexible, efficient migration systems that reflect the needs of the modern business traveler, but then also address their concerns about security and job protections for their native workers.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Peggy?
So I come from a complementary and adjunct industry to the business traveler, and that it's the relocation industry, which is reliant on business travel in order to get the people where they need to go on a permanent basis. So I'm going to just pick up on a theme, Tom, that both you and Lynn talked about. And, the genie's out of the bottle. We are global, and we're not going to put the genie back in the bottle. But I'll put on a global lens and not a U.S. lens for a second. For many years, the U.S. was a net importer of talent. I think we're going to see that change. So what we saw after the Paris Accord decision was President Macron came out and said, you know what, we're going to create this new tech industry visa, and we want to welcome talent into our country. You had Trudeau north of the border here kind of take a similar approach. So I think that there will always be this movement, as Tom was talking about. It's just a function of it might be a little bit different, or it might be in different directions, because I think there will always be countries that are welcoming and may have put aside a little bit of that nationalism fervor that we heard, 7, 8, 10 months ago.
Okay. So we've already started to talk about the second theme, which is safety and security, but let's go a little bit deeper into that. So Michael and Tom, let me ask you, how do you feel businesses are going to have to adjust their travel risk strategies to fit this modern day business travel, knowing that we're going to all continue to need to travel? Particularly given the concerns around terrorism, how should businesses be looking to emerging technologies to help mitigate that risk?
I'll start this one as well. I think that work with your security departments. They've been dealing with these sorts of issues, all their careers. As a matter of fact, there are other industries, healthcare, hospitality, higher education, same situation as travel. You want to keep them secure, but you want to create a comforting, welcoming experience. So there's a lot of knowledge there in security departments in balancing those things. But in this case, you have to be mindful of customers' perception of our response to their needs. They have legitimate concerns, and sometimes they may be overblown, but they're not experts in that area. They're going by emotion. We need to work with them, comfort them, and give them the resources that they need. Specifically, operation centers are popping up at corporations that monitor situations in real time and keep travelers updated on what's going on in their area and what resources are available. Secondly, pre-travel trip planning. I would recommend that the travel manager or director get together with the security manager or security director, the traveler, and the traveler's manager, and go over best practices, resources on the ground, and just talk about any concerns they have and how those can be addressed before the travel occurs. And what you're going to have is a much more sophisticated, savvy traveler who practices good hygiene. And that's good for any, travel anywhere in any scenario in any level of risk. So I think that's one area. And I mentioned before, in terms of technology, a lot of companies are adopting GPS tracking of their folks wherever they go. We did a survey where just a couple of years ago, only 10 or 15% were doing that. In light of the terrorist attacks last year in the UK, it's gone up to 25%, and another 40% say they're considering it. So you see a lot of movement there.
And other than the basics of more preparation, better understanding of the environment, understanding the resources that are available on the ground and the companies provided resources versus diplomatic and government agency resources and so forth. There are some surprising uses of technology. In the supply chain world, Twitter is almost something you can't do without. Not only does an employee have the ability to communicate via Twitter, but you also know if your supplier's facility is going down in real time. It used to be months sometimes before you knew that. So if you've got employees on the ground at that facility, or you're just concerned about your supplier's employees, which is a real fact of life, you know that instantaneously now. So technology, I think, has put us in a place where we can react in real time to potentially serious situations, and that makes it a better situation for everybody.
Okay. So with this in mind and this increased focus on security within corporate travel programs, what are the threats to this traveler experience? I know I don't want to lose that traveler experience that I've come so accustomed to over the last several years. So how do you balance the security with making sure that you keep that focus on that personalized traveler experience? Tom, if I can start with you.
Yeah, sure. Well, we typically, the large companies that work with ISM typically have got large structural arrangements in place. And those security precautions are something that are typically negotiated as part of the overall relationship. And staying within those boundaries is actually very valuable, I think, for the corporate traveler. They have an understanding that there's security protocols that are put in place, arrangements around secure transportation to a facility in the field or to the airport. I was in Rio after the Olympics. There was a lot of discussion about, North Americans traveling to Rio and whether they were at a certain level of risk around that. So just being aware of that. I was stranded in Incheon in South Korea, and I was, could have been the center on the local basketball team, and I was the only guy in a business suit. That was a pretty obvious mark, right? So first thing you do is you ditch the suit and the tie, and you look to, take some common sense precautions. So if you stay within the boundaries of your corporate program, a lot of scenarios have been anticipated already. You can discuss them in advance with your supervisor. I think that's a very important step. And you should be okay because your companies have thought about it and they do care about your well-being.
Mm-hmm. Michael?
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I would add that when you're traveling, you've got to remember you're representing your organization and their reputation. You're not a tourist. And you've got to think a little bit differently. You can still walk on the London Bridge. It's not off limits, but you have to be a little more careful about these things. Maybe don't walk on the London Bridge when there's a lot of tourists there. There are practical pieces of advice when you're traveling in a place like Mexico, for example. I was just in Mexico City, and my boss was terrified that I'd be kidnapped. It's like, I haven't left the hotel. It's like, what? That's a little bit over the top, but know where you're going. Arrange in advance if you're going to a specific hotel or a restaurant that these places are vetted. There are certain common sense things you can do, and the security and the travel departments should be willing to help with this. So you don't have to go crazy. You can still have a nice time at these places, but just pay attention and just be alert to your situation. It's called having situational awareness, and that's what we should practice.
Always good advice. Lynn?
So, situational awareness is a great way, I think, to segue into the visa side of it. So I think if there's one bright spot about the travel ban is it's brought attention to the whole issue of immigration and the need to have the appropriate visas when you're traveling. And so I've seen greater cooperation between the people I work with in HR and in the legal departments who are responsible for immigration compliance and the travel folks. So I think you are less likely now to have employees who are just jumping on a plane and going to a meeting or to do business and kind of bypassing travel and immigration without really thinking they're not going to get caught. I think, to enhance the traveler experience, a number of governments are putting programs in place to pre-clear travelers. So in the US, we have the Global Entry Program. In Australia, it's SmartGate. In APEC, it's the APEC business card for frequent travelers. And there is some reciprocity between those programs. So I would say if you have frequent travelers, spend some time mapping out where they're going and how they may be able to enroll in one of the programs and either get reciprocity in the others or to enroll in those programs. I think the other thing that's critical is not just that people know that they're applying for the right visa, but that they're really prepared when they go in for their visa interviews. When they go to talk to somebody at a consular office, they should really know why they're traveling for business and exactly what they're going to do there and what they're allowed to do on the visa that they have. Often when we see people kind of get caught up at a border or get caught up with a visa denial, it's because they don't really understand the purpose of their business visit, or they say that they're doing things that are kind of outside the scope of what they're permitted to do. Many laws have not kept pace with kind of modern business, and so most countries haven't dealt effectively with the whole notion of that you can work anytime, anywhere with your laptop. And so you just really need to be aware of what you're allowed to do and not allowed to do.
Great. Peggy?
Yeah, so, I pick up maybe a slightly different perspective. So in our industry and our constituents, right after the first Paris bombing, I think there was this, oh my gosh, a reluctance potentially to want to go and take a work travel assignment. But for good or for bad, since then we've had multiple ones, and there is this desensitization that has occurred in this. So when we talk about the traveler experience, even here in America, after 9/11, we adjusted. We got used to taking off our shoes and doing all those certain things. And, then it was the water bottles, and then it was, this and that. So from a traveler experience perspective, I think that the people will continue to want to do this because the drive to experience something outside of their native environment is much stronger than the inconvenience of taking off your shoes or even worrying about registering somewhere. So I think those of us that didn't grow up in the environment of all these sort of terrorist attacks, it's alarming to us, but I gotta say the millennials are like, I'm going, I'm ready.
Great.
If I offer a thought on that, there are some important, I think, macroeconomic trends that are also going to affect the pattern of business travel, and I could talk about that all day, and I won't. But supply chains are becoming regionalized, and so I would expect more in-region travel to cover business needs and less extended travel from wherever your corporate headquarters might happen to be to cover that supplier meeting or to meet with those employees locally. Another important trend to keep in mind is there was an era in the 80s and the 90s where if you were a US-based multinational, you sent an expat to stand up your operation. We're not doing that anymore, right? The talent's already there. You're cultivating, you're frankly usually better off and lower costs by bringing local talent up. And that's going to mitigate the need for some there's always going to be a need for, travel is necessary, it's never going to go away, but the patterns may be shifting a little bit.
Yeah.
Okay, so one more question. I want to close with a bit of a lightning round. There's been so much change in the travel industry just in the last 5 to 7 years. So wanted to get your thoughts on if you could paint a picture of global business travel in 2025, what do you think it's going to look like? So can I start with you, Peggy?
Absolutely. So 2025 is, in some aspects, right around the corner, not some aspects from a pure technology perspective, pretty far away. So, if I think about 2025 and who will be, boarding most of these aircraft, I think about millennials and Generation Z, the kids that are 19 and 20 and under. And, these are digital natives. They grew up with a laptop. They came into the world. They took their own selfie coming out in the delivery room, I'm sure. So they're very comfortable, I think, with that element of it. But, so when I think about, you've got these digital natives, but you also have these kids, and I can say this because I'm not in that generation, but these kids who just want to experience something different than what they have today. Okay, so here's where I think the future is going to be. Augmented reality. And for those in the room that think that I'm crazy, that's okay, but Pokemon Go was augmented reality. So I think when we look at the future of business travel, just imagine you're in Omaha, Nebraska, but you really want to be in London, England, right? So you go, and your entire office area becomes London, England. So not quite the hands-on experiential, but I think we got to pay more attention to augmented reality, and Pokemon Go proved that. Who would chase around a little guy? get badges. I don't know, but they did it.
Yeah, somebody does. Somebody does. Peggy?
So I think in 2025, we'll still need to have face-to-face meetings because there's just nothing that replaces that. But I do agree that the locations will change. We're seeing a lot of interest in Africa right now, in South America, and those governments are moving quickly to try to attract talent, to attract investment, because they know that's what they need to grow their economy. So I think we're going to see some countries that are going to figure out how to reform their policies to make it easier for people to move in, to get visas, to do the investment and do business. And I think, unfortunately, we'll see some countries that are going to struggle to do that. So we'll have to stay tuned and see where that happens. But it'll be a mixed bag. But I think companies are going to have to pay more attention to compliance regardless of where they are.
Michael?
I'm going a little more techie here. You heard it here first, folks. You put away your smartphone. You're not going to be tracked by your smartphone anymore or even interact with the internet through your smartphone. You're going to have wearables and implantables. Mm-hmm. Now, you didn't really hear it here first. You probably got it from The Economist or something, but or Harvard Business Review. But so then there's the hacking risk to those devices. The other high-tech out there thing I think is happening is, and this is for much shorter travel, commuting. Commuting is going to start to happen in congested areas by drones. Mm-hmm. It's already happening in Dubai. It's weird to think about people in little Jetsons cars going up to their buildings, but it's starting to happen, and it's a way to get around traffic and congestion. So can those be hacked? Are those safe? That's something that they're going to be grappling with then. A third thing is we're seeing the growth of driverless cars and the growth of the sharing economy. And I think those will intersect in an interesting way. Because now you have Uber drivers. You hardly have to drive anymore with Uber and Lyft, and you don't have to stay at a hotel if you have Airbnb. Sorry, hotel companies. But, there's so there are cyber risks to all those, and our company's going to require that you go in a driverless car because accidents occur, 99.9 occur through human error. So are we going to now say, okay, you can't drive your own car, can you not go in a human-driven taxi? So issues like that, and those can be hacked. So we're going to deal with more of the cyber side.
Great.
And
take us home.
Yeah, okay. So I would again say that the center of economic gravity is shifting. We all know this, right? The world's largest emerging middle class is going to be in Southeast Asia and in Eastern China. So we have to pay more attention to very significant policy decisions being made in that part of the world. There will be a bullet train from China probably all the way to Europe by 2025. There'll be bullet trains in other parts of the world. That might be a preferred method of travel for security reasons and because the speed now makes it feasible to travel over those distances in a relatively efficient way. But whatever those decisions are, the port development issues, the infrastructure decisions that are being made in that part of the world will set the pace, I think, for the next wave of the user's experience in travel. And it won't be the United States necessarily, or necessarily US-based companies that are leading the way. We have to accept the fact that leadership is probably going to be coming from other parts of the world. We're not conceding it, but we have to understand that we're not standing alone anymore in setting the agenda for global travel.
Well, from augmented reality to wearables to more bullet trains, driverless cars, there's a lot to look forward to, and it's an exciting time. So thank you so much for your time. Thank you all for your interest, and this concludes the panel. So I hope this kicks off a great conference for you all. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Right. Good job.
Nice to meet you.
Thank you.
Good job. It's fun.
Great job.
Yeah.